All right, well, kia ora koutou nau mai haere mai. As Anna has so wonderfully said, my name's Theresa Buller, and my professional role is as the subject librarian for law and criminal justice here at UC in Otatahi. And as part of my role, I spend a lot of time teaching and using legal citation as part of my day-to-day role. So I said that I would do a webinar really looking at the New Zealand Law Style Guide, which is the referencing style used in New Zealand by courts, lawyers, universities for a consistent legal referencing style. So I've designed this as an introductory session where I sort of decipher some of the mystery, but I've also left time for questions at the end. But please, if you've got questions, chime in, use the chat, and I'll make sure we answer everything at the end. All right, so today we'll look at what the style guide is. I'll tell you how you can access it, lots of examples and time for questions as well. So the Law Style Guide is officially the legal style for Aotearoa. It's been a standard format since the first edition of the style in 2011. So hopefully since then, everybody has been doing the same thing. That is a dream. It's not always consistently applied, but the principles remain the same in the way references are structured and how you can use those references to find material as well. So when I talk about the Law Style Guide, this is what it looks like. So it comes in a wonderful book, and you'll see that I have my own, not very well, but I have my own copy. It is very dog-eared and very well loved. It also is available online in two different places. One is through NZLLA, which is the New Zealand Legal Information Institute, and AustLIA, which is the Australasian Legal Information Institute, sits behind that, and it is hosted on their website. And the second place it is online is through the New Zealand Law Foundation, who provided a substantial amount of funding for the project to make the Law Style Guide happen. All three are exactly the same. So whether you're looking at the book or either of the online versions, all the examples are the same. And there's lots more content within that than I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so when I'm teaching the New Zealand Law Style Guide, I often think it's best to think about it in comparison to APA. As library staff, we tend to use APA as a default. It's the referencing style we use as a profession, but the Law Style Guide is a little bit different. So the Law Style Guide is a footnoting style. So rather than using in-text citation, it's footnotes at the bottom of the page. Sometimes endnotes in some books, but generally the courts use footnotes, and most academic writing uses it as a footnoting style. The biggest difference from APA is that it is a stripped down simple style. So there is little to no punctuation, and there's always a full stop at the end of every citation. Party names and titles. So when I say parties, I mean the people who are involved in a court case. So for example, Fitzgerald, he was a state servant, public servant, took the PM Muldoon to court. So their case is Fitzgerald or Muldoon, and the case names are always in italics. In APA, when you do an in-text citation, it might look like P dot and then your page number. Law Style Guide is way more simple. It's just at whatever the page number is. So this reference here, Fitzgerald or Muldoon, 1976 to NZLLA 615, tells me all about it, and we'll come back to what a case citation means. But at 619, sorry, is the page number that I need my reader to go and find. Rather than a bibliography just being a list of everything cited within the text, the New Zealand Law Style Guide recommends that the bibliography includes everything you've consulted or read as you've been preparing a piece of work. I always tell students that it's a way to show off to your marker. It is a way to show off how much has been read, but also when you're using a footnoting style, your footnotes are evidence for your argument. So only you know why you're choosing particular sources. In law, we also call them authorities. And you might not include everything you've read. So you can show to your marker, yes, I've read the top 10 cases, but actually only one of them's been relevant to my argument. The thing that I know is most interesting about the New Zealand Law Style Guide is that it demurs on using IBID. So APA will use IBID for another reference, or other footnoting styles use IBID. The Law Style Guide uses what's called an above N rule. So this one, Fitzgerald and Muldoon, above N1 at 25. We will come back to that. Okay. All right. So what happens when we're referencing a case? So what I've done is I've identified the most frequent sources that are used and referenced, and I thought I'd tell you how each component of the citation is made up, and then give you some tips for how you might find that information to go and find it. I'm starting with a case because they are the most specific to law. So you can see here that I've got a case. It has two parties. So they were the people who were battling it out in court, where it was Taylor and the New Zealand Poultry Board. The New Zealand Law Style Guide uses still, and law generally, uses a really book-based idea of finding material, even though we have really specific legal databases. Even though lots of material has been digitized, we still use a print-based finding idea. So in my case, Taylor and the New Zealand Poultry Board went to court. My citation for this case tells me that it was a 1984 case published in volume 1 of the NZLLA, starting at page 394. And that it was heard in the Court of Appeal. So legal citations love to use references. The NZLLA is the law report series. So they are the books in which I can find cases. And if I find the NZLLAs, I can find this case, Taylor and the New Zealand Poultry Board. So what my citation is telling me is that if I went onto the shelves and I found the 1984 NZLRs and I found volume 1 and I opened it up to page 394, I would find this case, and it would also tell me that it was from the Court of Appeal. Okay, so lots of abbreviations. I can tell you that NZLR stands for the New Zealand Law Reports, and they're the most frequently cited cases in New Zealand. So New Zealand Law Reports, the big and most serious cases, you will find them in there. Okay, you'll note here on these slides that I've put each part of this citation into different colors. That's really just a clue for you so you can see how each bit fits together. I did once have a student ask me if they needed to use all their colors in their referencing, and I sort of said, well, bless, but no, just black and white. I've also put the NZ Law Style Guide rules on each of these slides. So rule 3.2 talks about cases that have been reported. And when I talk about a reported case, I talk about a case that's in a book. So traditionally it would be in a book, still possibly could be in a book if your library is getting them in print, but generally we find them online now. It also means that this citation is unique to my case, which means that there is no other case from 1984 that I would find at page 394 in the NZLR volume 1. Okay. So that's a pretty basic case citation, and that format is used worldwide for most cases. Sometimes you might get a citation that looks like this. So in the mid-noughties, the courts decided that rather than using big, long traditional file names, they would give every case what's called a neutral citation. So a neutral citation is this bit where it tells me who my parties are. So this is Alice and R standing currently for the king, previously the queen or the king, depending on who the monarch was, sometimes pronounced R, sometimes pronounced the king or queen, sometimes pronounced the crown, sometimes the police, depending. Generally, I'd say Alice and the king. Sometimes I might say Alice and R, depending on how I'm going. Okay, so I know who my parties were. And then the neutral citation bit is this 2022 NZSC 114. Now that is a straight, unique running number assigned to this version of the case by the court. So it was a 2022 case. NZSC tells me it's from the New Zealand Supreme Court, and then it was the 114th case in the New Zealand Supreme Court for 2022. Okay, and every case will get its own unique number like that from the court. Depending on the court, the NZSC bit might change. So it might be NZCA, being the Court of Appeal, NZHC is the High Court, then NZDC is the District Court, and so on, and so on. Okay. And then the second part of my citation is still that really traditional book part. So it was a 2022 case that I could find in 2022 volume 1 NZLLA, starting at page 239. The question I always get for this one is, why don't you have the court at the end of your citation like you did for Taylor and the New Zealand Poultry Board? I don't need it at the end because I've got the neutral citation bit that tells me that it's the NZSC. It's just one of those weird wee things. Okay. In terms of how to find a case from here, so every citation is unique to your case, and it really then starts to depend on what kind of access you have to cases. If you are like us and you have access to Lexis Advance or Westlaw New Zealand, I think this 4-step process is the best way to find it. So that abbreviation that I talked about, the NZLR bit, tells me what book series it's in. And law loves abbreviations, but that one tells me it's NZLR. I know it's the New Zealand Law Reports. But if not, I could use the Cardiff Index to abbreviations, which, oh, hold on, I just need to sort out my Zoom. I can Google the Cardiff Index to legal abbreviations, and it will tell me what that abbreviation stands for. So let's get rid of that bit. And then the two that I've shown you are both from the NZLR, and the Cardiff Index will tell me that NZLR stands for the New Zealand Law Reports. From there, you can just go back to my slideshow. Look in your library catalogue and see if you've got access to the New Zealand Law Reports. If you do, search in whatever database or open the book up to whatever page it is to find it. But I expect you may also need to put, you might need to put an interloan through if you don't have access. And if you do, just in the interloan, whichever library you request it to, just in the interloans comments, put the full citation, and that will help the interloans team to track it down. Yeah, okay. So cases get really tricky really quickly, but generally this idea that cases, modern cases, so I'm talking cases for the last 20 years, will tell you what court they're from and the unique running number, and also where, if they've been published in a book, so reported is the term we use, how I can find it in a book. And the history of law reporting is long and saga-ish. In a nutshell, it used to be that the only way you could get hold of cases were through the reported books, which is why there's this very traditional idea of a year and a volume, an abbreviation and a page number. That has changed over time, and now generally law librarians and lawyers and judges find them online, but we still stick to the super traditional model of, if a case is so important that we could find it in a book, we identify it using that super traditional book citation. Okay. All right, so that's referencing a case using the New Zealand Law Style Guide. Referencing a statute, so an act, a piece of law, is super simple. It is just the name of the act, and you can see that I mucked this one up when I was preparing yesterday. I actually didn't put the year in. It should be Crimes Act 1960. So let me just edit that now in Google Docs. Crimes Act 1961. So my citation will look like this, okay? What that tells me is the name of the act and the year it was enacted. And I can then search for that in legislation.gov.nz. So and then legislation.gov.nz is a free website hosted and maintained by the Parliamentary Council Office, where you can access New Zealand acts and statutes for free, and then Crimes Act 1961. Let me click on search, and here's my statute. Okay, so the big thing with referencing is that it gives us, hold on, stop sharing my screen, too many buttons. Okay, here we go, back to sharing my screen. The thing is with legal citation is the citation will give you all of the information to go and find a source. Unlike APA, it's not very specific about how you find it. So all a citation is really saying is, this thing exists. I'm telling you all of the information I know about it, but you can go find it in whatever way works for you, whether that's finding it in print or online. Cool, so I've touched on that New Zealand legislation can be found through legislation.gov.nz. If you have a subscription to Westlaw New Zealand or Lexis Advance, you could also search in there as well. And both of those are really specialized legal databases, and really their role is about connections between legal material. For example, if you find one source, you will then be able to find everything that talks about it or that it talks about as well. They're also really expensive, so generally just found in universities and law firms and legal information places like the courts. Okay, so let's look at the more traditional sources that you're probably much more familiar with. So starting with referencing a book. So in the New Zealand Law Style Guide, again, it's just a matter of saying what the thing is. So Andrew Butler and Petra Butler wrote a book. That book was called the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, a commentary. And the example I've chosen was the second edition published by LexisNexis in Wellington in 2015. It doesn't matter if I looked at this book online or if I read the print one. All I need to say in my citation is, this is the book I read. This is all of the information that's going to help you find it. You go and find it yourself. Some things that are specific to the New Zealand Law Style Guide. The title of a book is always in italics, and an author's name is always first name, last name, never last name, first name, never last name, initial, always first name, last name, or sometimes initial and last name, depending on what's on the book itself. So again, that citation will tell me everything. I can search in my catalogue for the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act and see where you have access to it. One of the unique things about the Law Style Guide I wanted to touch on was how you reference authors or how authors are referenced. So the model is always first name, last name. And then if you have two authors, it's first name, last name, and first name, last name. And then if you've got three, it's first name, last name, comma, first name, last name, and first name, last name. You can see how this could go on forever. So unlike APA or other referencing styles where you can have hundreds and hundreds of authors, reference for 4 or more authors just is the first author and others. So I think the moral of the story with the New Zealand Law Style Guide, if you're writing something, find 2 other authors and no more, or be the first author, and then everyone else can be an and other. Okay. So a lot of it is just simplifying the referencing down. So it's really what is the bare minimum we need to know about a source to find it, and keep it really clean and tidy. I've shown you an example of referencing a book, a whole book, where it's written just by 1, maybe 2 people, and they've contributed to the whole thing. However, law, like most other academic texts, has a huge number of sources where there are giant, and I'm talking like 1,000-page monographs in some instances, where multiple people have contributed to a substantive work. And when that happens, we need to give credit both to the person who has written the chapter that we're talking about, and also give our reader a big clue about where I'm going to find this chapter. So you'll see that for this example, Jessica Palmer wrote a chapter called Constructive Trusts, and it was in a book that Andrew Butler was the editor of. So I need to identify him as the editor by saying Ed. And his book was called Equity and Trusts in New Zealand. And I've looked at the 2nd edition published by Thomson Reuters in Wellington in 2009. And this chapter starts at page 335. So again, still a really book print-based referencing style. Doesn't matter whether you look at it online or in print. If you find the book Equity and Trusts in New Zealand and open it to page 335, you are going to find the chapter on constructive trusts written by Jessica Palmer. Okay. Law uses a lot of journal articles as well. So in terms of legal sources, generally, especially in New Zealand, there are big textbooks covering large areas of law. There are some niche specific ones, but a lot of commentary and discussion happens within journal articles, within the legal journals. And they all get their own very specific legal citation style, which looks like this in the New Zealand Law Style Guide. So the actual citation bit starts to look a lot like a case citation did. But the difference for this one is that I know who wrote the article. So Leonard Rotman wrote an article. That's my big clue that it's a secondary source, that it's been written by someone. And his article was called My Hovercraft is Full of Eels, Smoking Out the Message in Aaron Marshall. Okay, Aaron Marshall was a case, it was a Canadian case about fish, I think. It's a big case. I just really like it and use it as an example because you can see that there's a case name mentioned in the journal article title, and that idea that case names are always italicized transfer over to citation of sources that talk about the case. So for example, Aaron Marshall is italicized. Then my citation gives me all of the information that tells me again where it's been published. So it was a 2009 article published in volume 63 of the Sask-Owl Rev, starting at page 617. So still this traditional idea of books and volumes and page numbers, even though we actually generally find them all online now. And because of that citation and the abbreviation SASCAL Rev, I can go back to the Cardiff Index and search for SASCAL Rev, which tells me that it was published in the Saskatchewan Law Review. Okay. So while the Law Style Guide uses abbreviations, Cardiff is usually the tool, well, it is the best tool to untangle them. And then from there, you know where it's been published. So this one, the Saskatchewan Law Review, you could search for it in your library catalogue, Google it, or if needed, interloan it as well. Okay. When I put a call out for what people wanted me to cover today, the only question I had was about how to reference an online commentary. So this is a super specific law example, because within the big legal databases, Westlaw New Zealand and Lexis Advance, there are big online commentaries. Once upon a time, these used to be loose leaf texts. And loose leaves are, again, a very traditional law thing. And you might have seen them before. They are ring binders where the pages would get swapped out when the law changed. So when I worked at Christchurch City Libraries ages ago, we had this big collection of loose leaf titles, and every month updates would come. So it would be someone's job to change out the pages. Generally, these are now available online. Some libraries I know still have them in print, but we don't. We have them all online now. So if you wanted to reference an online one, this is how I would reference it. So super simply, who the author or the editor was, what the online commentary is called. So this one's Garrow and Turkington's Criminal Law in New Zealand. And then I've marked this one up as well. It should be online edition Lexis Nexis at CRI 72.2. So let me just change that now. Cool. All right, that looks oodles better. Let me go back. Cool. So I know who's written it. I know what it's called. I know that I'm going to look for it online, and LexisNexis is the clue that it would be on the Lexis Advanced database. This one here, I've put the pinpoint in purposefully because law sometimes uses weird numbering. And it might use numbering that is unique to a particular title. So for this one, CRI 72.2, makes no sense when you're looking at the citation on its own. But if I was searching within Lexis Advance for Garrow and Turkington's Criminal Law in New Zealand, and I searched for CRI 72.2, I'd find it straight away. Okay. Law does weird things, and sometimes it looks funny, but I often tell students it doesn't matter. It will make sense when someone goes and looks to find it. So just follow what the document itself says. And rule 6.3 is the rule for citing that one. They are the most common sources that are used. There are lots more rules within the New Zealand Law Style Guide, and lots of really specific rules for specific sources. But I just wanted to touch on some of the things that make it easier for you to help look for what you're trying to find based on a citation. So some of the citations I've shown you are just to a particular source and not so much to a particular page or paragraph number. So how do I reference a particular page or paragraph? So what you will see in citations is you will see the citation in full. So all of that information with my example that tells me I'm looking for a book by Grant Morris The book is called Law Alive, the New Zealand Legal System in Context. Then I need to find the 4th edition published by Thomson Reuters in Wellington in 2019. But the at 63 bit is the bit that tells me I need to go look at page 63. Okay. Sometimes though, as I mentioned with Garrow and Turkington's, the paragraphs are numbered, and that's quite unique to law, and that you might get a judgment from the court or a book or a journal article where every single paragraph has a number, and that's really about specificity and about making it as clear as possible to the reader. If you go look at this paragraph, you're going to find what I'm talking about. So for my case, this example, I've got Cullen, and it would have been the Queen in 2014. It was a 2014 case that I would find in volume number 3 of the 2014 NZLRs, starting at page 417, and it was a Court of Appeal case. So once I've found that case, I then need to go and find paragraph number 26. So in the Law Style Guide, square brackets are your big clue that you're looking for a paragraph over a page number. Okay. I see there are a couple of questions in the chat, so let me just double check. Do I need capital letters for the subtitle of Law Alive? No. The Law Style Guide doesn't use title case, it uses sentence case instead. Think biting my lip. I will let you know that I have the most amazing colleague in the whole wide world. His name is John Arnold, and he is a grammar expert, and he checks my references for me. So he would have made it so it was perfect. So it's sentence case rather than title case. Thanks, Catherine. I will come back to Rachel. I'll come back to your questions at the end, if that's okay. All right. So, oh, now I've lost myself. Okay. Okay, where did I get to? All right, how to reference something a second time. So, Grant Morris, Law Alive again. You can see that I've made a mistake. That Law Alive is not in italics, and it should be. But how do I reference something a second time? So the thing is with law, there's a whole thing about concise, simple English, and often in footnotes, especially when you're referencing the same source over and over again, it will eat up your word count if you're writing the whole thing. So Grant Morris, here's our book again. This time for footnote number 1, I'm talking about page 19. I could just keep referencing Grant Morris in full every time over and over again, but it takes up too many words, and when you're using a footnoting style, obviously the more words you have in your footnote, the more space they take up. So the Law Style Guide uses what's called the above N rule. So what that means is that a later reference to a particular source will just give the author's surname, Morris in this example, and then say above N1. So above N1 is my clue that I've already given the reference above at footnote number 1. So I always tell students that means you're telling your marker, go and have a look at footnote number 1 to find out the details of the source. But then for footnote number 23, go have a look at page 52 for whatever I'm talking about for this source. Now, this is Rule 2.3 in action, but I really don't like the description of Rule 2.3, and I know that students always found it really confusing. So one of my lockdown projects was to write this document, which I've put the link in my PowerPoint, and you can Google probably UC Law citing material a second time. The document itself looks at Rule 2.3 in action. So I have really carefully considered and explained to students how they can cite things over and over a second time. And I am very happy for this to be shared and used incredibly widely, in the hope that it will also save other people some time. So you can see here for footnote number 1, I've referenced Grant Morris. If it's the same source directly after, I can just do the pinpoint, so the at 72-bit. So that's the bit that my reader can infer it's the same source. But you can see that for footnote number 4, I'm talking about Morris again, and the same for footnote number 8. Okay. So a little bit different from APA, but very much I've given you the source one time, and I'm going to keep referring back to that rather than telling you the full details again. Okay. I've got a slide here, but actually it'll make way more sense when I show you my example. So the Law Style Guide is a footnoting style, so footnotes within the document. And then, especially for academic work, there's a bibliography at the end. And the Law Style Guide says in Appendix 7 that you need to group your sources by type. So that means all of my cases together, all of my legislation together, my books, chapters and books, online commentaries, and encyclopedias together, and then journal articles together. So really that idea that my marker or my reader could look at my bibliography and go, okay, I can see all the cases you've used, I can see what statutes you've looked at, etc. A little bit different to APA, obviously, because they group by sources. Within each category type, it's an alphabetical list, although for secondary sources, it's alphabetical by the author's surname, even though it's still that first name, last name format. These are just the top 4. The Law Style Guide has some other suggestions. Sometimes students just use an other sources category, or if they've got lots of the same type of thing, maybe reports or government material, etc., etc. Okay. What about other jurisdictions? So I've shown you the New Zealand Law Style Guide, which is mostly and generally the New Zealand style. So it is the style that the courts use, with sometimes some unique things from the court, the universities use, and most of the legal publishers and legal journals use. If there's any differences, usually it's just stylistic, but that general principle applies, that your citation is telling you what the source is and giving you enough information so that you know about it in a unique way. Every other jurisdiction generally has their own referencing style. So for example, there's the Australian Guide to Legal Citation. The UK uses OSCOLA, which is the Oxford Citation to Legal Sources. I don't know what the A at the end stands for. And then the US has the Blue Book. So if you are looking at a source that's from another jurisdiction, maybe looking at their referencing style will help you to work out what it is. If in doubt, refer to the APA manual. Generally, I think that there's a bit of a hierarchy that I will start with the New Zealand Law Style Guide. And if I can't find a rule within the New Zealand Law Style Guide that will help me reference sources, then I will look at the Australian Guide. Then if I have no luck with the Australian Guide, I tend to look at the Blue Book, so the American one. And after that, then I tend to go to the APA manual. And they all kind of interlink and talk about each other as well. All right, questions. Now, I did leave one in the chat that I said I'd answer at the end. So Rachel, is a regulation formatted the same way as an act? Yes. So all of that secondary legislation, so things that at different points in time have been called statutory regulations, legislative instruments, secondary legislation, rules, orders, all that same idea, the name of the regulation and then the year of the whatever it was or the year it was put in place. And then the next question was, are there abbreviations? Yes. So you can imagine that sometimes things have really, really long names. And as we're moving to bicultural, bijural, bilingual Aotearoa, often both, when both Māori and English are used, names get longer still. So there's a rule in the New Zealand Law Style Guide on reference tags. So you can put a reference tag in your text the first time something's been cited. So for example, if I was talking about I'm trying to think of a really long act off the top of my head, but the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is a UN treaty, and then I could put in brackets, I could put Convention on the Children's Rights or something, and then just make it shorter, okay, and then just use that all the way through. I can do that in my footnotes too, so that they're not really long. So if I was talking about, for an example, a case where it's a really long name, I could just abbreviate it down and use that as well. So rule 2.3.2 is the one as well. Cool. And then Catherine, sentence case is what the Law Style Guide uses as well. But also, if I get it wrong when I'm writing, John checks it for me and sometimes doesn't tell me why I've got it wrong as well. He didn't check my PowerPoint today, so that's why there are a couple of mistakes, and that's all my own fault. But did anyone else have any questions about that? I feel like I've flown through that and made some assumptions about what people have access to. So if you don't, how do you find out what volume a case is in? Okay, so if you don't have access to the New Zealand law reports, how do you find out what volume a case is in? So the citation will tell you. So that's the bit, if I go back to my case citation list, right back to the beginning where we looked at Taylor and the New Zealand Poultry Board, this part of my citation where it tells me that it's 1984 volume number 1, that's my big clue. So that would be the information that if I knew from the abbreviation and using the Cardiff Index to abbreviations, what the name of the law report series was, so the book series in which I can find my case, then when I put the interloan request through, that's how I'd know what volume it was. But like I said, if you're requesting a case through interloan, pop the whole citation in the comments field, and it will generally help the interloans team. I quite often, well, not quite often, sometimes our interloan staff appear and they're like, we don't quite know what this citation means. Can you please decipher it? And because we've been given the whole citation, then we can go, okay, this is what we mean. Awesome. And then Catherine, are you wrong if you only reference a case with its court judgment and not the law report? Do you mean the neutral citation, Catherine? I hope you do, because that's what I'm going to say. So I've kept this quite simple today and not really mentioned actually how super tricky case citations can be. So every single case gets this bit. Now, okay, every single case for the last 15 years gets this bit, the year, the court abbreviation, so NZLSG, and then the unique running number. But only some cases then get reported in a book and get the second part of the citation. So if you only have the first bit, that's absolutely okay to use that because it's unique and it will help someone find it. Generally, if you've got a citation like that, then you just search the legal databases or NZLLA for that one as well. I should say it's only really the big and important probably isn't the best way to describe it, but it's the ones which have a significant bit of the law. So it's about precedent. So because it used to be the only way you could access the law, the cases that were reported were significant because there was something about the law that everybody needed to know. But now we have the internet. Now you can get hold of lots and lots of cases, but not every case. And for that reason, sometimes you only get the first part of a citation and not the second part. It really depends. Is there any reason to use one type of citation over another? E.g., a case was reported in NZLLA and another law report as well. Olivia, the answer is generally no. So New Zealand Law Style Guide says just refer to the best reported case. So, sorry, some of this is really specific law stuff. So the New Zealand Law Reports, if you've got an NZLR citation, just use that. Sometimes cases get reported in other law report series, like the criminal law reports or the environmental law reports or the family law reports. But generally that's because they're subject specific. So if you've got an NZLR one, use the NZLR citation. But if you don't and you've got another one, use that one. Does that make sense? Other referencing styles, such as the UK, they use a zillion different. They might have 5 or 6 or 7 to tell you every single place and every single version of your case. New Zealand, we keep it pretty simple. Cool. Catherine, should you use all reference to a case, all of the neutral citations? It depends. So every case gets its own unique citation, and that unique citation is for that particular judgment from the court. So if you are talking about the same case and how it goes through the courts, you would need to cite each one as an individual thing, rather than one big long string with all of the different courts. Yeah. So, and sometimes, sorry, flicking back to referencing tags, very specific and very law niche, that sometimes your reference tag, you could be like Alice Court of Appeal case, Alice Supreme Court case, etc. as well. So, yeah, cool. I feel like this is veered from the very simple to the very specific, which is fantastic. I am always super happy to help and answer questions as well. Sometimes I will run them past John because he has a knack for referencing that I sadly lack. I don't know what I'm going to do without John if he ever leaves, to be honest. Yeah, but are there any other questions? I realize that I've talked for about 45 minutes. So maybe not.
It sounds like all the questions.
Brilliant. Well, like I said, please, I'm really happy to be approached. My email was on the front of my PowerPoint, but no, maybe it didn't. My name was on the front of my PowerPoint, so just Google me and you'll find my UC address as well. I'm really happy to chat about referencing. I know that for those of you who are working with the Law Style Guide, I know that there are upcoming discussions about what a 4th edition might look like. So if you've got any ideas or thoughts or things, I have a long list already. Yeah. And also someone's chucked in their plug for the NZLLA conference. One of my, what's the way to describe it, professional service roles, as immediate past president of the NZLLA. We have a conference coming up in Wellington at the end of August. We would love to see anyone there. Yeah, come along and hang out with some law librarians. We're pretty fun most of the time. We talk about geeky stuff like this, but it's fun.
And Theresa, if you're happy to send me the PowerPoint, we could put that up on LIANZA Connect for people to access.
Perfect. I can do that too.
Yep.
I'll download
and if
it.
any of you out there don't know what LIANZA Connect is and you would like to join, it's open to anyone. You don't have to be a member of LIANZA. Do a search for it, or you could email our office@lianza.org.nz, and you can join and start having conversations with other wonderful people like Theresa.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yet again, it's very interesting. I'm kind of a geeky APA person and it keeps changing all the time and I don't get to use it very often anymore, so sort of going back and checking what they should be is always interesting, isn't it? Trying to figure it out. But I have massive problem solving exercise sometimes.
It is great, and I will, if you're using it frequently, I would, the book's not very expensive. I think it's $30 at our bookstore. It's the one thing I get I encourage students to buy, just because I find it heaps easier to flick through than try and navigate online. But maybe I'm just getting old, so I don't know.
Your fingertips. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll just do a closing karakia, and then you have a whole 8 minutes to go and grab a cup of tea before you're into the next part of your day. Unuhia ki te uru tapanui, kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takatā. Koia rā I rongo, whakairia aki ki runga, kia tina, hui tai ki e. Thank you so much, everybody.
And ka kite, see you all around.